Yeah, in English is on air. My name is Antitank. Hello, and today the 31st day of Russian occupation of Ukraine. More than 1 month we fight against these occupiers. Over the past week, our heroic armed forces have dealt powerful blows to the enemy, said the president, our president Volodymyr Zelensky. Let's watch his speech.
Рахунок російських втрат на цій війні вже перевищив 16 тисяч убитих. Серед них і вищі командири. Про убитих російських генерал-полковників чи адміралів поки не доповідали, але командувач однієї з армій окупантів і заступник командувача Чорноморським флотом вже є. Збройні сили продовжують відбиватись від атак ворога на півдні країни, на Донбасі, на Харківському напрямку, у Київській області. Стримуючи російські дії, наші захисники і захисниці підводять керівництво Росії до простої і логічної думки. Треба говорити. Говорити змістовно, терміново, чесно і заради результату, а не заради того, щоб тягнути час. 16 тисяч російських військових вже загинули. Для чого? Що це кому дає? Розмова має бути серйозною, український суверенітет має бути гарантований, територіальна цілісність України має бути забезпечена. Тобто умови повинні бути справедливими, а інших український народ просто не прийме.
Today we will discuss Joe Biden, President of USA, visit to Poland and his communication with President of Poland, Andrzej Duda. There works in Poland works my colleague, it's Alexey Matsuka, editor-in-chief of Ukrainian State Foreign Broadcasting. He made a big material. Let's watch it.
For the second day in a row, President Biden is in the European Union, and not just anywhere but 100 kilometers from the closest point to Ukraine, the city of Rzeszów, Poland. Here, President Biden chaired a meeting on a humanitarian situation in Ukraine. President of Poland Andrzej Duda was also present, as well as Secretary of State Antony Blinken. US Aid Administrator Samantha Power was also with them. Question on the agenda is one: how to help Ukrainians who find themselves in Poland now to survive this time. I think not just survive, but to feel like human beings. There will be help. The Americans are not leaving either Poland or Ukraine in this difficult situation, and they promise that the hand of this help will be felt by everyone, each and every person who travels from Ukraine to the territory of the European Union.
Our focus, of course, is to channel as many resources as we can into the country, particularly in a manner that allows Ukraine's own distribution networks to pick up the aid and get it to the people most in need. And the UN now is in a position where it has reached, I think, more than 700,000 people, with everything from cash assistance to food assistance, but we know it is nowhere near enough. And we also know very specifically that Russia's tactics of encircling cities where civilians are living and bombarding them creates real access issues for the humanitarian groups that we fund. And so that really is our biggest challenge, is how is there enough pressure exerted on the Russian Federation, where in places like Mariupol or Chernihiv or Kyiv itself, even parts of Kyiv, where that access is provided and civilians are able to get out and food is able to get in.
I'm originally from the Donbas region, and now we live in this second time where we are located from Donetsk and then continue our life in Kyiv city, and now we relocate from Kyiv to Uzhhorod. So it's very dramatic situation for all of us, but the most dramatic situation for people who live in Mariupol now, and we know about the position of Russian Federation blocked our humanitarian aid from Kyiv, from Ukraine, for these average people. So how you can impact, influence for them, and how to give these people who live in Mariupol something like hope to get food and water now.
Yes. I've spent a lot of time on the phone today with various humanitarian organizations who are perched and ready to put food into the town. And not just food, as you know, medicines have run short, water is inaccessible in many parts of the city, But again, as you said, the challenge has been that while the Ukrainian government has been very, very eager to create safe passage and to have a ceasefire in order for food and supplies to get in, the Russian Federation has shown that it wants to approach Mariupol as it once with the Syrian government approached Aleppo. And that is all we have seen from them, despite countless promises. There have been heartbreaking scenes of Ukrainians in Mariupol being told that humanitarian pauses were going to occur, showing up, often with elderly, with children, as a mother, I can't even imagine, showing up, and then the shelling starts. Almost like it was never serious at all. And so you asked how I could give the people hope. All I can tell the people of Mariupol is that we are working around the clock to try to muster as much diplomatic pressure on the Russian Federation as possible so that Putin feels he has to let food and medicine into innocent people. And obviously the United States and the European Union countries, along with Japan and Australia and democracies around the world, are imposing very steep costs on the Russian Federation's economy and on President Putin and his cronies. So we need China, we need Beijing, we need India, we need countries that have maintained friendly ties or neutral ties with the Russian Federation to be raising their voices on behalf of this urgent, desperate humanitarian need. And we will be ready. The humanitarian groups are ready. USAID has supported them in scaling up their assistance. They are ready to go. There is one thing that stands in the way, and that is President Putin.
Уникальный момент.
A unique moment. President Joe Biden and President Andrzej Duda are 100 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Here at the local airport in Rzeszów, they are holding an emergency event to provide humanitarian aid to anyone and everyone in need who comes from the territory of Ukraine. Duda thanks Biden for supporting the refugees, and Biden thanks Duda for opening the borders to all those who need help and protection from Vladimir Putin in the civilized world today.
As been pointed out, 10 million people have been displaced thus far. 3.8 million people to other countries, including more than 1 million children. And according to the UN, there are thousands of civilian casualties, 12 million in need of assistance, but hundreds of thousands of people who are being cut off from help by Russian forces and are besieged in places like Mariupol. I mean, it's not stopping. It's like something out of a science fiction movie. You can turn on the television and see what these towns look like in cities. I want to thank each one of you and your organizations, excuse me.
Весь день я провел сегодня в аэропорту.
Spent all day today at Rzeszów airport with Presidents Biden and Duda, and of course the only person missing here was Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who is actually not far from here in the city of Kyiv, where he conducts the defense of the whole country. But in the spirit of what was going on here, there was an atmosphere of friendship and struggle for peace not only in Ukraine, but in our whole Eastern European region. From Poland, Oleksiy Matsuka for UATV.
Volodymyr Dubovik, Director of the Center for the International Studies, joins our program. Volodymyr, hello.
Hello, good to see you.
Glad to see you again. Thank you that you usually join and explain lots of facts that are going on according to this Russian war in Ukraine. So let's discuss summits. NATO summit, it had already passed. Also, we saw Joe Biden's visit to Poland yesterday. Today we also wait for some information. What can you say now?
Yeah, well, that's a good visit for Biden, I think. The main reason for him to be here in Europe is to express solidarity and unity with allies, united in punishing Russia for its aggression against Ukraine and helping Ukraine. It's now clear that the war is not going to be quick, like Russians probably hoped it to be, and it's going to be more protracted conflict. We're already over 1 month, and that requires a different stance and position and different type of coordination of activities on the part of our Western allies and friends. And that's why Biden decided, he requested this summit of NATO. It wasn't planned. He requested an extraordinary out of schedule kind of summit. And that's why he came and he talked to allies, and he also talked to them apparently about what else can we do to help Ukraine. What kind of weapons can you provide, for instance? That was definitely behind the closed doors, so we wouldn't know, and that's a good idea for everyone not to know exactly what they're going to provide. And then also with the meeting with the European Union was important for them, for Americans, because they need to coordinate activities with their allies. Finally, the G7 is unanimous in their position of criticizing and Russia and supporting Ukraine as well. So big 7 economies of the world. That's a strong position there too. There's also a discussion of whether Russia should be excluded or not invited into the G20 meeting or summit, which is going to take place several months from now. But we'll see. I mean, it's a symbolic gathering. It doesn't give Russia any benefits or advantages to take part in it, but maybe it's a good idea to indeed to exclude someone who is an aggressor, who is shelling civilians and doing all these horrible things. In terms of visit to Poland, it's also a very good idea for Mr. Biden because he needs to show support for Poland. Poland is the forefront of the struggle now. Poland accepts most of our refugees and is overwhelmed already and needing help. And in that regard, it's very timely. And that not only European Union is going to provide 1.1 billion euros to help with the refugees effort, that the Americans are also picking up the bill, so to speak, and they're going to provide $1 billion as well to help with the refugee situation. Not to mention that Mr. Biden said that America itself is going to be accepting 100,000 refugees from Ukraine into America, into the US. And finally, Poland is a hub right now. There is a humanitarian convoys coming through Poland into Ukraine. There are weapon supplies coming through Poland into Ukraine. And Poland is very active in trying to find other ways to help us and other formats as well. For instance, the other day, they've been talking a lot about perhaps a humanitarian zone here in the Western Ukraine, where some countries, not necessarily NATO as an alliance, but several countries, including Poland, might send some of their troops to shelter refugees here, or should I say internally displaced persons here in the Western Ukraine, because Western Ukraine right now has millions and millions of Ukrainians from various other parts of the country. So all in all, I think it's a useful visit. They have decided to continue to punish Russia and maybe come up with more sanctions on Russia if they don't stop aggression, and there's no sign they're going to stop the aggression against Ukraine. And they also talked about various ways to support Ukraine, militarily and financially and politically.
The punishment of Russia, in which court can be Putin and Russian people punished for this war in Ukraine?
Well, right now by punishment, I mainly meant the sanctions and the pressure on them and disuniting them from a world economy and, criticizing them in the international organizations as they should be criticized, like UN, like OSCE and others. That's what I meant by punishment. In terms of punishment in legal terms, yes, there is a way forward, and we know that the International Court of Justice has made its decision. They're going to proceed, perhaps with looking at the war crimes committed by Russia here in Ukraine. Russia so far is ignoring this decision, is basically making, pretending that it's not happened, but it doesn't matter. I mean, they'll go forward, and unfortunately, there is plenty, there is so much material to prove that Russia indeed has been committing war crimes here in Ukraine. So this process will go on forward. I mean, like it did with some other places and dictators, be it, for instance, former Yugoslavia, like Milosevic and others. They also didn't want to end up under the tribunal or incarcerated, but that's just happened. So I hope that there'll be a process here too, perspective for this hearings in a legal sense.
And let's mention also, remind the phrase Joe Biden when he talked to this 82nd Airborne Division in Poland. He mentioned phrase that you can see how Ukrainians protect their country if you, I don't remember, if you visit country or something like that it was. Then White House clarified that American troops wouldn't go to Ukraine. How do you think, in which case USA troops can really come to Ukraine and help in this war? It's impossible, absolutely.
I think it's absolutely impossible indeed. I don't think they're going to change their mind. They made their minds, and they understand that they shouldn't be here. They believe in a possibility that if they move their troops in, or even their, let's say, airplanes into Ukrainian airspace, that would bring them to direct confrontation with Russia. There is absolute priority for Americans and NATO as an alliance to avoid that scenario. They don't want direct confrontation with Russia. So therefore, they're willing to supply us with weapons, and therefore become their proxy force, if you like. I mean, we're fighting for our own land, of course, but for the West, for the NATO, we're becoming their proxy force, meaning that you can support them, and Russia is weakened by our defense of our land. And by the way, Russian military is really, is really being battered now by Ukrainian forces here. And therefore, any kind of threats that they can throw around in Europe that you should be afraid of our Russian military right now, they sound kind of hollow. They sound kind of empty. And that's why they so often they come to mention that they have nuclear weapons. We are aware that they have nuclear weapons. But if there is any weapons of mass destruction being used, that could be a different ballgame. I mean, there was some reports here in Ukraine that Biden allegedly said if Russia uses chemical weapons, then America might intervene militarily here. No, he didn't say any of that. But he said there will be some reaction. He didn't specify what kind of reaction. So no, I don't expect American troops in here. But they will be there on the eastern flank of NATO. And as Biden has mentioned, that's exactly something that Putin didn't want to happen. For the eastern flank of NATO, from Baltics to the Black Sea, for the American and troops and other troops, maybe from Western European countries, to be based there in bigger numbers than before the war, which means it could be seen as a sign of returning to the Cold War, maybe emergence of a new Cold War.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Volodymyr, for your explanations. Volodymyr Dubovik, director of the Center for International Studies, was online in our program. I'll show you also a small video with the Lviv activists. They wrote a small, video, small ask to Joe Biden. Let's watch what they asked.
Hey Joe. Hey Joe.
Hey Joe.
Hey Joe. Hey Joe. Thank you for the support. We're using all of it to help those who have lost their homes. We are strong. We do everything we can in the cities that have been bombed.
In cities like Kyiv,
Mariupol, Sumy, Kharkiv, and many others. But we have to do more than this. The bombs,
the missiles,
the planes are still killing so many of our sisters,
of our brothers,
our husbands and wives,
our children,
and grandchildren.
And soon it will be 1 month.
Our heroes are going to win this war, but in the meantime, we have to save lives.
We're gonna win this war. All the Ukrainians know it, and I think by now the world know it too. But all those deaths, all those kids dying, it should be stopped. Close the sky all the way. Close the sky. Lead this effort.
Close the sky. Close the sky.
Close the sky.
NATO! Close the sky! From your friends in Ukraine, close the sky.
One more guest joins our program. It's Timofey Milovanov, president of the Kyiv School of Economics, advisor to the head of the President's Office and Minister of Economic Development, Trade and Agriculture of Ukraine 2019-2020. Hello, Timofey. Glad to see you. My question is connected with talk of our president. He spoke live at Doha Forum. He mentioned about global crisis, food crisis in the whole world because of Russian war in Ukraine. How can you now say about world economy because of this war and about Ukrainian economy now at this moment?
I think people should understand that the economy, the global economy as we knew it, is gone. Russia has broken all red lines, not only in Ukraine, but also globally. And the immediate consequence of this will be at least in 3 areas. One is agricultural food security, the second one energy security, and the third one logistical supplies, in particular from China to Europe. So that's going to create higher costs for productions, changes in supply lines, transformations of businesses. In terms of practical implications, right now there is a planting season, which is not going to be as efficient as it's done every year. Plus, there are issues with fertilizers. Ukraine produces about 11% last year data, 11% of the world supply of wheat. And in top 10 grains, we're probably leaders in maybe at least 5 of them, such as corn and barley and others. That means that logistically and in terms of actual goods, there'll be a shortage in the region, and the region which will be most affected is Africa, Northern Africa, Middle East, and some of the Asian countries. That will impose or creates that will create additional pressure on their fiscal situation. That meaning that they would have to spend more money on food and buy this food somewhere else. But the food, it's not that you can buy it. It's a global limitation of the supply. Therefore, there will be competition. But still, there will be not enough food. People will have to substitute, and substitution is not easy to other grains or to other staple food. And that will create political pressure in these regions. So there will be destabilization all around the world, and only because of the food supplies. In addition, the supplies, logistical supplies from China to the European market will be challenged because of the instability in the region. A lot of this is supplied through sea, but some of it is supplied through railroads, and railroads are going through Russia, through Ukraine, through Belarus, and those will be problematic. And energy is going to continue to be a fundamental issue for Europe, and it will all be translated in uncertainty for the financial markets and in higher prices. So the situation is unpleasant for everyone involved. We are up for a major transformation in the global economy.
And now we know that Kyiv School of Economics already raised more than $10 million for armor. You help our forces, our army to protect country. And we know also about the project Russia will pay. Tell a little bit about this. We know that you gather some data, some information about losses of Ukrainian economy of because of Russian invasion. Tell me about, please, more.
Yeah, so we engaged at least in several projects. One of them are more standard for us, such as education. We are now providing consulting and wartime business school counseling and teaching for businesses to transform themselves, to adapt. We have this website, but it's an analytical project where people report, and not only people, government and local governments report the areas, the critical infrastructure, the economic infrastructure which was destroyed, and we record it, verify, and assess. And in that way, we prepare the background information for the reconstruction. And finally, we also help with the supply chains, especially in critical items such as bulletproof vests and medical supplies. So we established a task force from multiple companies which are working on this, and we're quite efficient at this too. So as a university, we're working on all of these areas. You can donate to us. We're asking you to support us. Go to kc.ua website. But I also ask all of you to, if you're doing, you've worked on business, make sure, I ask you to help for your Ukrainian business or for international business to work with Ukraine. And we want to trade, we want to export and import, we want to provide services. We have working economy, so please engage with us and support us economically as well by working with us. And if we're talking about some kind of intellectual support, please help our businesses. So if you're a business yourself, engage with the business to make sure that we're operational. This is very important. It's not your typical refugee crisis where everything is lost. No, 80% of people who left Ukraine are thinking about coming back, would like to come back at the first opportunity. So we need jobs and economy for them to run. And in the central and western Ukraine, the economy is operational. So let's do it. Let's get it done. Let's make economy strong so our front lines are also strong.
And have one more question, talking about Russia will pay. Russia already pays thanks to sanctions. Tell us about economy, Russian economy right now.
Yeah, the economy is going to suffer quite a bit. You can compare it to this post-Soviet Union type of crisis, but fundamentally for the rest of the world, the most important question is to, or the most important objective is to pressure Russia into being unable to finance and support its military activities. That means that we are very interested, the world is very interested in limiting critical supplies, critical imports for Russia, making sure they don't have access to technology which is needed to modernize their military or to repair the capacity they have already lost. In that sense, that there's quite a bit of success. We know that a lot of critical plants and manufacturing facilities are now in Russia. Military facilities, first of all, are now inoperational because they don't have critical supplies. So we have to keep up pressure. And also financially, yes, financially Russia is suffering. There are shortages. There is deficit of goods, of basic goods now, and that's going to create political pressure too on the government.
Thank you, Timofey, for your explanations. I'll remind Timofey Milovanov, president of the Kyiv School of Economics, advisor to the head of the president's office, was online in our program. And I'll remind you, 31st day of Russian occupation of Ukraine, how it was, what kind of it was. I'll show you the video.
Explosions, fires and automatic rifle fire. The shelling in the Luhansk region does not stop for a minute. The enemy is targeting food storehouses, trying to leave people without food. During the day, the Russian military shelled Severodonetsk, Rubizhne, Lysychansk, Zolota and Shchedryshevo, damaging 10 residential buildings, 4 multi-story buildings and 6 private houses. 7 people were evacuated from the debris and 3 more people died. The occupiers continue shelling Mariupol. However, our military give a worse repulse to the enemy. Azov published footage of destroyed enemy troops. 6 cruise missiles were fired at Vinnytsia by the occupiers. Some were shot down by the anti-aircraft defense, but another part hit the target and destroyed several buildings. We are under missile fire, so I urge everyone, if you hear the alarm, go down to a bomb shelter. The occupiers are trying to intensify the activities of sabotage and reconnaissance groups on the territory of Kyiv in order to destabilize the situation and disrupt state and military administration systems, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The occupiers keep shelling the village of Makariv, some 50 kilometers from Kyiv. At the same time, our defenders continue to liberate settlements near Kyiv and hold previously determined defensive positions. Active fighting continues in Sumy region. The enemy has bombed the city of Ochtyrka again. Shelling of the suburbs and the city of Sumy continues. The situation remains tense, fighting continues. This is Konotopsky district. An active phase of hostilities has been taking place there over the past day. These are the Okhtyrsky and Sumsky districts. Some settlements are under the control of the Russian occupiers. Various terrorist actions are reported there. The genocide of Ukrainians is taking place, but our plans and my personal prognosis are modestly optimistic. As a result of the artillery strike in the village in the Korostensky district in Zhytomyr region, 1 residential building was destroyed, and 4 residential buildings and 2 household buildings were partially damaged.
They document facts of war crimes committed by Russian soldiers on the territory of Ukraine. Lots of facts, and some of them watching our material.
We are collecting evidence of war crimes committed by the Russian Federation on the territory of Ukraine. Maybe you witnessed it.
A special point for documentation of war crimes committed by the Russian military in Ukraine began operating in the Ivano-Frankivsk Center for Administrative Services. Here, IDPs can tell their story so that such facts become known.
It is important to do this now, as many people are emigrating abroad. For many, Ivano-Frankivsk is the starting point for further immigration, and there is a probability that many people may not return to the territory of Ukraine. That is why it is very important to record these testimonies first, or they will simply get lost.
Family of doctors from the town of Popasna in the Luhansk region writes down their evidence about the atrocities of the occupants. The Russian military shelled their hospital for several days, and they were not even allowed to safely evacuate critically ill patients. We wrote about the fact that our hospital was destroyed. We were inside right at the time of shelling, and it is not working now. On the 5th of March, in fact, the hospital stopped working because it was impossible to provide care, and about the evacuation of seriously ill patients to the city of Lysychansk. They could not get there themselves. They targeted the hospital for several days. All this was done on purpose. Volunteers have now recorded several dozen actual war crimes told by their internally displaced people. Anna is a volunteer, one of those who record in detail the testimonies of those who arrived from hotspots.
Many people do not know what a war crime is, but at the international level, documented by international conventions, even the elementary facts of finding militants and equipment among civilian facilities, this is already a war crime. The same blatant fact is the disguise of soldiers in Ukrainian uniforms or disguise in medical uniforms. This is also forbidden.
At the same time, volunteers say not everyone who survived the horror of war is willing to talk openly about it.
We fill out protocols like this about cases of destruction. Are you ready to fill out protocols like this? Oh, probably not ready. As a historian, I have worked with some people who witnessed Soviet crimes, and very often I've noticed fear in them. There are a few brave people who want to talk about it, to tell on a tape recorder and put their signature on it, to fill out the record. This is where additional conversation with people is needed.
Such points of collection of evidence of war crimes are now operating in many places of residence of IDPs. In schools, gymnasiums and dormitories, lawyers help to prepare the documents correctly.
A person fills out an application, gives their passport data and personal information, also indicates the place of residence. We also make a protocol of interviewing people who witnessed crimes of the Russian Federation on the territory of Ukraine. We also have an email address, phone number, and people who can take photos, videos on the phone can send us.
There's nothing to be afraid of. It's just like the evidence of what we saw, that's all. The more such facts, the better, the volunteers say. This will allow to gather a complete evidence base for the international court. Law enforcers also record such testimonies. A month into the war, they have already launched pre-trial investigation into more than 2,500 war crimes. Reported by Yevhen Kryzhainy, Anastasia Lysova, Pavlo Shtelmach, UATV News.
Meanwhile, Russia creates its own worlds and says that it's not war. Let's watch some fakes from Kremlin.
They manipulate for dozens of years. They find hundreds of arguments how to justify murders, but they do always kill. Russian propaganda machine works at all possible levels. After the direct lie about no war in Ukraine failed, they lied about non-killing civilians. When that one failed, Russians lied about biological weapons, made provocations, tried to use third parties for influence. Welcome to the new stage of Russian lies. British citizen Graham William Phillips, former worker of Russian propaganda channels Russia Today and Zvezda, sponsored by the Ministry of Defense of Russia, entered the territory of Ukraine hiding behind Russian occupiers. In 2014, he was one of the paid influencers who created a fake image of the first Russian invasion for the West. Now, when these channels are banned, Graham Phillips once again is loyal for the Russian money. It's only lies and destruction that Russia gives the world. New propaganda trend, crying bloggers who seems to feel sorry, but not for killed children or women in Ukraine. They cry for banned Instagram and Facebook. These are also fake tears. Facebook, Instagram and other social networks are still available in Russia, and even the attempts of the Russian government to limit the traffic is easily bypassed by VPN and Asian connections. Fake tears, fake regrets, fake protests. This video was spread around the world as an example of fight for freedom. The lady appears on air on the main Russian internal channel with the anti-war poster. But it is also false. These news issues for the last years never go directly on air. The armed guard at the door do not pass anyone during the broadcast. And a few more details. The anti-war poster on the main internal Russian channel is written in English, when most of the viewers speak only Russian. It was published by the influencers close to Putin himself, and obviously with the aim to create some new picture for the West. Add to that pro-Putin demonstrations in the Kremlin's puppet states. But whatever tricks Russia uses to justify the attacks on civilians in Ukraine, there is always one main human law. There can be no excuse for bombing peaceful cities. There is no excuse for killing civilians in captured cities just for fun. There is no excuse for terrorist attacks on women and children. And as long as the civilized countries try to be fair with Russia, the civilization falls.
Really no excuse. Meanwhile, Russian troops, the Russian military gave up here in our army. What they say also, let's watch.
I am Vladislav Likhovidov. I was born in the city of Volgograd in Russia. There were 3 of us when the unit had not yet been formed. Initially, we were supposed to go to the Cape Opuk in the Crimea. On that day, we learned that we were going to the war, and we really did not want to participate in it, so we fled. We were under fire in the city at first. We got out of our BMP the second time. Our unit went to the BMP-2. We found out what was really going on. A helicopter came out and fired at us. After that, part of our unit deserted, and we spent the night in the forest and went to the locals to surrender in the morning. As for the combat mission of our unit, it seems to me that we were left to divert fire on ourselves, like cannon fodder. All the people, the lowest ranks, who served with me were alternative military personnel, that is some kind of community service instead of military one. Secondly, the maximum service time in such regiment is probably 5 months. I served only for 2 months. The 33rd Regiment, in which I served, was formed quite recently, and for an entire year it was not supposed to be involved in any military actions. They led us there on purpose, and we did not know about it. We were supposed to act as cover, while someone more experienced did his job in this war. They broadcast on the TV, and the authorities say that there is no war here in Ukraine. It's just that the people come in and greet us as liberators. That's all. Even on the TV, if they say that there are some losses among our staff, then this is due to the negligence of our soldiers. Roughly speaking, someone fell and sprained his leg. In fact, we die both from Ukrainian soldiers and from Russian soldiers. This is due to the inexperience of our soldiers, and no one knows at all what kind of tasks to perform and why. I still do not understand why this war is happening. I don't see the point in it completely. For the sake of what? Territory? It makes no sense. We simply lost most of the young population, the economy has been killed, everyone considers Russia as an enemy. Many more people in Ukraine suffered, many children too. I think that the one who gave the order to start this war is already a freak, an old moronic. Those who are going to come here, it makes no sense for them to appear here at all. I went to the military service, roughly speaking. Because of this, just in 1 month I took part in hostilities, became a war criminal and a prisoner of war. And I hardly think that we will be exchanged if even the corpses of Russian soldiers are not taken away. Most likely, I will stay here for a long time.
One more guest is online, Alexander Kraev, Director of North America Program and Foreign Policy Council, Ukrainian Prisma. Hello, Alexander.
Yes, good day to you.
Question connected with Joe Biden, with his visit to Europe, his about summit NATO and his visit to Poland. Did you suspect just these results or something more?
Well, basically, if we speak about the NATO summit, if we speak about the G7 meeting, the results are mostly considered a moderate success for us and for European community, because it's something in between the minimum program and the maximum program. Yes, we do have some results on restricting the trade of Russian gold and the restricting of Russian gold reserves, so they cannot use it in a proper way. Of course, we have some decisions concerning the use of chemical and biological weapons by the Russian Federation. And of course, there are some future documents to be drafted concerning their responsibility for such a possible move. However, we do not see any common ground, any common position of the NATO countries as we speak about the weapon supplies and as we speak about the equipment supplies to Ukraine. We still have several separate bilateral programs rather than an alliance position. Also, we do suspect some misunderstanding between the Western allies, especially if we speak about the Germany or the Hungary, their position. Because of this misunderstanding can breed some additional problems as we speak about the sanctions, about the regime of sanction divergence and many other positions. And if we speak about the visit to Warsaw and the Poland visit as a whole of the Biden presidency, well, there is still some interesting things to be discussed, and there is still some interesting things to await from this visit. So we are still waiting for additional information.
Now, some experts say that something is going on the same as was in Aleppo in Syria, and some experts say no, in Syria was not so awful as now in Ukraine. What can you say?
Well, definitely what Russia is doing here, especially in Mariupol, especially in Chernihiv, in some parts of Kharkiv, is a genocide. Because what is genocide in accordance with international law? It's a deliberate destruction of a group of people of concrete ethnicity or of concrete nationality, with the end goal of obliterating them from Earth or destroying them as some group of people. Well, Russia doing exactly that. They are prohibiting the humanitarian corridors, they are prohibiting the humanitarian cargoes from entering these areas, they are destroying our people with artillery shells, rockets, aviation bombs. They are basically starving them to death without any food or water supplies. So in any case, from any point of view, it is a deliberate genocide of Ukrainian people. So there is nothing like Aleppo, there is nothing like Syria or even Georgia or even any other war that Russia started in the last 30-40 years. This is something different just from basically people's point of view, from humanitarian point of view. This is a deliberate attempt to destroy Ukraine and Ukrainian people as well.
Mm-hmm. What kind of steps we can wait next from USA, from Joe Biden after this visit to Europe?
Well, many of my colleagues, especially from the United States, pointed out that today in Warsaw some specific comments can be made, some specific new arrangements concerning the Poland proposals to enhance the NATO support for Ukraine. I will remind you that some of the proposals were, for example, humanitarian mission of NATO to Ukraine. Also, there were proposals about peacekeeping missions on the territory of Ukraine. Of course, a lot more weapons, including anti-air defense and anti-rocket defense. So we will see the true results, because the first summits, as I have already mentioned, they were great, but not at their maximum capacity. And so today's meetings, today's summits in Warsaw can provide us even with more results. So tomorrow will show.
And one more question about European reaction and all the countries, France, Germany. How you can consider this reaction? Is it enough or not?
Of course, it's not enough, because we still see some hesitance. We see some concrete deliberations on the part of Berlin and Paris concerning the full-fledged support for Ukraine. But it is, to say the least, it's much more better than we anticipated, because there was a common denomination that Paris and Berlin will abandon Ukraine, that they will not support any new and stricter sanctions, and that they will not give us weapons or any kind of military equipment. And as for now, we see that Germany stands with Ukraine when we speak about weapon delivery, they stand with Ukraine when we speak about some fuel sanctions, and yes, there is a concrete success for Ukrainian diplomacy, although there is still not enough to stop Russia.
Thank you, Alexander, for your explanations. Alexander Kraya, Director of North America Program in Foreign Policy Council, Ukrainian Prism, was online in our program. Also talking about Russia, I want to show you one video and then discuss it.
Modern history of Russia is a deep longing for the USSR, but not even the monstrous, defective USSR, as it actually was, mostly the desirable image of the communist empire. And the war in Ukraine is not something new for Russians. Rather, logic continued due to the world neutrality towards previous Russian wars. And everywhere the rhetoric was the same. Russia tried to present itself as a peacekeeper fighting against nationalists. The collapse of the Soviet Union coincided with the denationalization in Nagorno-Karabakh. It lasted for 6 years. South Ossetia, 1991-1992. North Ossetia and Ingushetia, 1992, once again Russian troops, terror and territory capture. Same year, one more experiment to create a puppet country, Transnistria Moldavian Republic. At least 1,000 people were killed then. 92-94, Abkhazia, first cruel intervention into Georgia and almost 3,000 people died. 92-97, Tajikistan, one more attempt to build the so-called Russian Empire in Central Asia. Chechen War in the mid-90s took the lives of 5,000 Russian occupiers and thousands of lives of civilians. Russians actually lost the first war, but they came back in 1999, and during the next 10 years they destroyed the real Chechen sovereignty, creating instead a puppet Kadyrov state. 2008, invasion in Georgia, annexion and creation of puppet Abkhazia state. 2014, Russians invade Ukraine for the first time, annexation of Crimea and part of the Donbas territories. 2015, Russians in Syria supporting the dictator Assad. 500,000 people were killed there. 2022, a war in Ukraine in front of the EU, NATO and other institutions. Russia expected the same ignorant, neutral position of the world society. But looks like it's time to stop this state and recognize it as a terrorist state, Russia.
So history of Russia is history of war. Somewhere Russia tried to denazificate some nations. Some people, I don't know, tried to make free, and as a result there were lots of deaths from Russian deaths, I mean civil people, not only military. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, people supported each other in any possible ways. They help in different ways, medicine, just volunteers, and also help of Ukrainians to the army. Also, let's watch one material.
3-meter anti-tank hedgehogs are produced in the Poltava region. The weight of one such is 7 tons. Neither a car nor a tank will move it from the place.
Ви самі бачите, як він називається.
You know what it is called. Our defenders promised to send me a photo from the Sumy region.
Мені обіцяють прислати з межі Сумської області фотографію, де вже один такий виріб пройшов іспитання, де в нього стріляли.
Where one such product has already passed the test. Russians shot from a tank despite the fact that the upper part was destroyed, but the product itself survived.
The anti-tank hedgehog occupies 2 lanes of the road. It is very effective at roadblocks. Poltava women decorated them with ornaments and inscriptions "Glory to Ukraine." There are smaller but equally effective constructions.
Ці їжаки, вони дуже цікаві тим, що як ти їх...
These anti-tank hedgehogs are very interesting because no matter how you put, they will still be operational.
Колеса в будь-якому випадку, як би їх не розкидали.
They pierce the wheels in any case, no matter how they are scattered.
These anti-tank hedgehogs are made in the shape of swallowtail. They are also produced by other companies. The most popular are from meter rails and pipes. The weight of one such is up to 300 kilograms.
Була така вимога, що вони були...
There was one requirement. They should be very strong. To do this, we reinforce it so that no Russian tank would pass along our Ukrainian road.
On the second day of the war, Poltava Enterprises responded to a request to help the army financially and with labor.
Це така конструкція, на яку, коли танк...
Due to this structure, the tank can't drive forward or backward.
While the neighboring regions hold the line and don't let the invaders into the center of the country, the Poltava region is trying to strengthen the region as much as possible and make it safe for IDPs who come from the hotspots of the Sumy, Chernihiv, Kharkiv, Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Reported by Olena Shustova, Anastasia Lysova, UATV News.
184 crimes against media in a month, 5 journalists killed in just 1 month, 1 missing information. It's I don't know, in this way maybe Russia makes our media free. I don't know how to explain even. Also, one more material I want you to show just to understand the real situation across this occupation of Ukraine.
Slowly but being cut from the traditional connections, Russia has turned its efforts towards alternative relations and has remembered about the old project BRICS, the economic union between Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. The one who noticed unusual activity is Carl Miller, author of a book about power in the digital age. Very clear it is targeting BRICS, Africa, Asia, said Miller in Twitter, and mentioned about the huge amount of sleeping accounts that were activated after the 2nd of March. So let's dive into and try to understand what they want and why BRICS is important on the background of sanctions provided against Russia. The term BRICS was invented by Goldman Sachs analysts in the report dated 2001. It was used for the prospective countries that would possibly create the union alternative to the EU. In 2006, in Russia, the first meeting of the economy ministers was held and the work began. Before the war, the intention to enter the global economy was considered the main goal. The BRICS was supposed to reach full capacity by 2050. China and India were to become the main global suppliers of manufactured goods, while Brazil and Russia would become dominant as suppliers of raw materials. But still, the export relation with the non-BRICS countries were bigger than internal ones. Moreover, the development was slowed down by the COVID pandemic. Another important way of economic development was the establishment of the BRICS Continent Reserve Arrangement, or in other words, creation of their own international monetary fund with their own financial system similar to SWIFT, available for all the 5 countries. The BRICS Development Bank started its activity in 2017. The biggest contribution was made by Moscow. The regional departments were opened in South Africa, Brazil, Russia and India, headquarters in China. And this financial system could probably have become the safe harbor for the Kremlin. But on the 4th March of 2022, the bank suspended the new transactions in Russia. Almost the same time when the weird accounts in social media started massively popularizing Russia and its war against Ukraine. Obviously, nowadays inside BRICS the countries are deciding the perspectives of the unity itself and the participation of Russia. As soon as it became toxic and cut from the traditional export markets, Moscow is obviously taking the partners down with it. But on the other hand, South Africa stays silent after the Russian invasion in Ukraine. India is behaving like nothing happened, balancing between two sides. China, with all the Asian diplomacy, is demanding peace for Ukraine without obviously condemning Russia. Brazil reacted with the foreign minister's statement, Brazil won't take sides over Russia's invasion of Ukraine, trying to leave the path to keep good relations with Kremlin. So for now, the unity of BRICS is in uncertainty. China, with its deep economic ties in Africa, Latin America and the EU, is playing safe, not revealing plans, but obviously staying apart from direct support of Putin. Brazil, with the economy devastated by coronavirus, is getting prepared for presidential and general elections this year. And with the majority of people not supporting the Russian war in Ukraine, the authorities are obviously losing their position. India, with long-term connections with Russia, doesn't want to break it, but risks to lose other export markets as Putin's supporter. South Africa also cannot stay apart for a long time. All BRICS countries are under threat of reputational damage. On the other hand, can they go on without Russia's toxic partnership? Well, India has the potential of the biggest growth among others during the next 50 years, mainly due to the reduction of the working age in India and Brazil, which will happen later than in Russia and China. So these are younger generation in BRICS countries who are going to make a decision about their future.
So today, the 31st day of Russian occupation of Ukraine, and we, Ukrainian State Foreign Broadcasting, continue working. I'd like to show you a small video about our work, about our broadcasting on air. Let's watch. UAN English is on air. We broadcast from the heart of Europe. It's Ukraine.
And again, Russian army attacks civilians using undefended sky.
That's called World War III.
We have rolled out sanctions since Russia first stepped foot into Ukraine, and those sanctions have basically completely undercut Russia's economy.
Denunciations, appeals, negotiations, I don't believe any of that will work. Russia needs to pay an economic price and the physical price in the loss of its troops and its equipment.
I don't think we've ever seen this kind of unity in NATO in decades.
and it's a good thing for Ukraine.
Unprecedented sanctions on Russia to ensure that this war ends.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. It's a real honour to be connected with the beating heart of Europe and your fantastic resistance to Russian aggression.
Most dramatic situation for people who live in Mariupol now, and Russian Federation blocked our humanitarian aids from Kyiv, from Ukraine, for these average people.
Russian Federation has shown that it wants to approach Mariupol as it once with the Syrian government approached Aleppo.
I am a retired police captain of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Russia. I am ashamed to have something in common with the Russian military.
The Russian Federation continues to bomb the town. As I was able to find out, heavy flamethrower systems have been brought in. My temple is sewn up, my nose is sewn up, my eyebrow is cut above this eye.
The occupiers in Kherson threw flashbang grenades at pro-Ukrainian protesters on the Svoboda Square and fired at them. Several people were injured.
If you had a possibility to say to the whole world, to all the countries, to governments of all the countries, what would you say?
I want to say, do something.
You should help us because all of our people is the army of Europe now.
Ukraine now protects values, not only our country, it protects the values of the whole Europe and the whole world. And you must know the truth, what is really going on here in our country. It was you in English, Anna Nichenko. See you tomorrow.